Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Way Forward, the official podcast of the Badass Teachers Caucus of the CTA. I'm Mark Norberg, Vice Chair of BATS. On this premiere episode, it is an honor and a thrill to welcome to the show socialist and activist extraordinaire, Kshama Sawant. Kshama, welcome and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for including me on this, Mark.
For those viewers who may not be as familiar with your work as others, I want to share a little bit about your background and correct any of this if it's wrong. So you got your PhD in economics from North Carolina State. You then taught economics at Seattle and Washington universities. You then turned your attention to politics. And in 2013, you successfully ran for a seat on the Seattle City Council, becoming the first socialist to win a citywide election in Seattle since 1916. While on city council, you successfully organized to win a $15 minimum wage, the first in the nation. You also went up against Amazon to win the tax Amazon ordinance, which now brings in over $200 million a year for the city to fund affordable housing, which you asked for that to be, or you lobbied for that to be earmarked. This is in addition to a host of renters' rights victories that you also won. You subsequently helped start the labor organizing group Workers Strike Back, and now you are running as an independent for the United States House of Representatives in Washington's 9th Congressional District. Kshama, what else should people know about your background or your work? And is there anything that I mentioned that you want to kind of add to?
Well, I think one thing I would add is the fact that when I was teaching in Seattle University and also I taught at Seattle Community Colleges, I was a proud member of the American Federation of Teachers, Local 1789. And actually, my local played a very crucial role during the Occupy Seattle movement. So it's a particular pleasure for me to be here with the Badass Teachers.
Thank you. Before we start, I just want to say something about you that really inspires me is just this steely determination you have when I see you advocating, and your refusal to compromise on the policies that you're advocating for, even though you might know the status quo would rather you modulate that or they're completely opposed. Was there any formative moment for you or crystallizing moment that led you to have this kind of certainty about your politics, or has this been sort of a lifelong evolution? Like, what is there a moment that brought you to the kind of politics that you have?
I think it's both the way I was thinking about it for a long time and also that particular moment, which I'll share in a second. But I think it's fair to say that I was obsessed from my very childhood. Like one of my earliest memories is about being extremely troubled, like distressed to the point of tears at the existence of this ocean of poverty and misery that we are surrounded by globally. Obviously, at that time in my formative years, it was the experience of looking at the utter devastation of living standards and lives of entire families, hundreds of millions of people in India. So that really radicalized me from the very beginning. I just had this combination of both an emotional, just a gut wrenching feeling that something needs to change, and also what I can only describe as a scientific, as a logical conviction that certainly this can be addressed because given the technological innovations, surely this kind of misery should be and can be ended. I just didn't know what the exact answer for that was. I grew up in an apolitical family, very academic oriented family, and it was just a quirk of fate that I was in Mumbai, and then I came all the way to Seattle, Washington, on the other side of the world, that I just ended up coincidentally running into socialists and really Marxists here. And I heard one speech from one Marxist, and for me, that was it. That was the moment, and that everything I was thinking about and all the conclusions I had reached in my own brain for myself in isolation, I was fully confirmed in all of that. And then I realized, oh, I'm not crazy for thinking these things, because the world makes you feel like you're crazy. I was even told I was arrogant for thinking that I could have any solutions. You name it, and I've heard that kind of naysaying theory. But then for me, that moment of clicking was when I recognized that, oh, there's an entire political science called Marxism that explains exactly what I've been looking for, and I have never looked back since then.
Super cool. All right. Yes, I hope we can get into that. So let's dive in. We have a series of questions for you. Now, all of these have been submitted by members of the Badass Teachers Caucus. So everything we're going to talk about today, it's top of mind on the minds of California educators. So let's start with just really big overall question here. It's pretty safe to say that we are living in crazy, volatile times. I mean, you cannot turn on the news or go on the internet without you being exposed to some new atrocity, some new violation of human or civil rights. We have climate crisis, healthcare crisis. People are being snatched off the streets, endless war. What is your sort of just overall assessment of what is happening right now at this moment in time on planet Earth, and then in America more specifically?
I would say the defining feature of the politics and society of our times is the gaping chasm between the opinions of ordinary people, the American working class and young people on the one hand, and the political leadership or the lack thereof that's on offer on the other hand. So, just to take up some of the things that you mentioned correctly, nearly two-thirds of US adults are extremely concerned about climate crisis. You're talking from California. We just saw a massive, unprecedented crisis of fires and just utter devastation just months ago. We've seen a Gallup poll from December last year that's found that 62% of Americans think that the federal government should ensure everyone has health care. Over 80% oppose cuts to food stamps, and a whopping 90% of Americans are against cuts to Medicare and Medicaid. But I just wanted to share in the November of last year, the Excessive Wealth Disorder Institute, which is appropriately named, they had a first of a kind sort of meta analysis, like an aggregate polling analysis, and that poll compiles results on 6 different mechanisms of taxes on the rich: a billionaire income tax, a wealth tax, a millionaire surtax, a capital gains tax, raising the top marginal tax rate, estate tax, and dynasty trusts. The reason I'm mentioning all of this is that on every single one of these mechanisms, a majority of American working people strongly support increasing taxes on the rich to fund working people's needs. All of these polls I have mentioned are across race, zip code, and political affiliation. So, regardless of whether someone is a habitual Democratic voter, Republican voter, independent voter, or as in the case of many working class people, understandably, they don't vote at all. And of course, the most overarching issue of our times that is facing us internationally is the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Nearly 500,000 Palestinians have already been slaughtered, and now we are seeing the onset of mass starvation, a famine that has been manufactured. Let's be clear, this is not a natural phenomenon. It has been manufactured by the Israeli state, and something Israel would not have been able to do without active political and military support from the United States. Now, this is the political landscape of tens of millions of working people. The majority have been reeling under a devastating cost of living crisis. They are against war and genocide, and they want to fight back. But the other side of the story is the complete lack of leadership. Obviously, you have both the Democrats and Republicans betraying working people, both supporting massive tax cuts for the rich, both continuing to be funders of genocide and engineers of mass starvation in Gaza. Why? Because they are both parties of the ruling class, and unfortunately, we've seen that the labor leadership, for the most part, is also tied to the Democrats. And now, and on top of that, you have people like Sean Fain and Sean O'Brien, and the leaders of UAW and Teamsters, respectively, also making overtures towards Donald Trump and his disastrous plan for tariffs. So I would say that's the defining feature of what we are seeing. And the lesson from that, of course, is that working people want to fight back. What we need is the leadership to actually pose a challenge to the Democrats, to the Republicans, and to the ruling class that the two parties represent.
So let me ask you this, and it kind of bounces off what you're talking about okay, I think everyone's going to agree that things are horrible, and you see these polls like no matter what your political, allegiance, yeah, like, my life is terrible, prices are out of control. Within the union spaces, though, what do you say to this? And this is what I hear often is, yes, Kashama, I don't disagree with any of these things, but I'm a practical progressive. I'm a realist, and I have to accept and understand the way things are set up. Especially here in California, the political Democrats have super majorities. That's a reality. And I'd rather understand the system and work it and get something and create some alliances and get some wins rather than stand over here and be inflexible and fight for these big giant systemic changes that are never going to happen. What is your response? And I think you have some real world experience in that. Have you heard that attitude or that position before, which I think is very understandable? What do you say to people that say you've got to accept the way things are and fight for what's possible, and you know that's how you move things forward?
Well, I think that if you want to be realist and it's sort of tied to reality, then it is our obligation to understand that as a matter of fact, what ends up happening or what is possible is not an automatic given that is entirely out of our control. What is possible or what ends up happening is entirely a function of the class balance of forces under capitalism. So we are living in the system of capitalism. The whole nature of capitalism is the goal of capitalism is to siphon off wealth, massive amounts of wealth, to the very very small number of billionaires at the top. They have trillions and trillions of dollars, and that comes at the expense of ordinary working people getting worse and worse standards of living. And the two things are not just coincidentally juxtaposed. One happens because of the other. Capitalism is a zero sum game. The more trillions that are accumulated at the top, they come from exploiting working people more and more and more. So if you understand that that's the reality under capitalism, keeping in mind that people want to be in reality, yes, well, here's a reality check for you. That is how capitalism functions. And so what working people end up facing, whether it is victories or defeats and further worsening in their standards of living, ends up becoming, as I said, entirely a function of whether working people fight back or not. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that being afraid of class war and not fighting back is not a solution, precisely because there is class war, period, whether we like it or not. Whether we fight or don't fight, there is class war against the working class, because that is in the nature of capitalism. Just to quote Barbara Ehrenreich, who wrote the really famous book Nickel and Dimed, where she talked about what it means, like what it looks like to live a low income person. She went undercover, working as a Walmart worker, and she found that working people simply can't make ends meet. But what she said was that capitalism is class war, and ordinarily, when working people don't fight back, it's like aerial bombardment against the working class. So my reality check to all the people who say, well, we need to be safe, we can't actually fight for radical things because otherwise we won't get anything. Well, my reality check to you is that you aren't winning anything because you're not fighting back. And when you fight back, you can win. And the reason is that when you fight back, it is possible to tip the balance of forces towards the interests of working class and give a defeat to the ruling class. And giving a defeat to the ruling class, to the billionaires, it means defeating, by definition, it means defeating the Democrats and Republicans. Why? Because the Democrats and Republicans, despite their differences, both represent the interests and the greed of the ruling class. So just to give a counter example, and I hope we can talk much more about this, because all of the crux of all your questions lies in this, is that when I was on the Seattle City Council, as you mentioned, we won what is now the nation's highest minimum wage. At that time, it was $15 an hour when we won, and you're right, it was the nation's first $15 an hour. And today, because we won, inflation increases. Today, Seattle's minimum wage is the highest in the nation at $20.76. Compare that to the federal minimum wage, which is at a scandalous $7.25. And why has that languished while we increased our wage? Precisely because when I took office as a city council member, I correctly recognized that my job is to build mass movements to put the fear of God in the Democrats, all of whom are, all of the city council members except for me are Democrats on the city council and were Democrats at the time as well. And I understood that my job is not to make peace with them. My job was to go as a disruptor of business as usual. And it was on the basis of exposing the Democrats and alongside that, using my office to build mass movements that we were able to win. So the kind of defiance that some people feel is counterproductive, it's actually, turned that on its head. And that's reality, which is that without that kind of defiant mass movements, we win nothing.
There's another sort of concern that I'm hearing now that I wasn't hearing before, and I'd like to get your take on it. I'm hearing not a lot, but enough that it concerns me from organizers and activists in the spaces that I'm in. And it goes something like this. It's like, first of all, I'm seeing the immense amount of like psychological stress that people are under because things are so crazy, right? And they'll say something like, let's say we're working on fighting for single payer healthcare, right? And they'll say, you know what, right now, because like my neighbor's getting snatched off the street, I'm not certain this fight is relevant anymore. I'm not certain that the big fights are relevant. Why are we fighting for the Green New Deal when this person can't even afford, my neighbor can't afford, or I can't afford just a meal? And so the logic then goes, what we need to do right now is we just have to hold on to what we have, that the fight is just protecting what we have. Education's under assault. They want to disband the Department of Education. We need to just fight for what we have. Let's get Trump out of the White House. Let's stabilize. Let's bring back democracy. And then we can start having some of these bigger fights again. Have you heard that? And what would your response be to somebody who says these big, giant systemic fights, they're not relevant right now because there's too much at stake for the immediate future, for the immediate day of a person's life?
I have heard those arguments before, and it's understandable, but it's also completely mistaken because the actual trajectory of how people have both defended against attacks on communities and also won offensive victories, like winning something that working people didn't have before, all of that, the history of all of that shows that the only way you can change the status quo, and which is a really bitter and grim status quo right now, the only way you can change that is by building a fight back, not by hunkering down and thinking that that's the way you can protect what you have. The most effective way of fighting to defend the rights we do have is both to go to adopt an offensive strategy to defend them. Even if that sounds counterintuitive, that is the only way to defend the victories we have won, and to pair that fight to defend the rights to win further offensive victories. So, in other words, not only should we in California, I would say, not only should working people and union members be fighting to stop the deportations, shut down the detention centers, and shut down ICE, ICE out of California. That fight should obviously be led by mass civil disobedience and strike action, but at the same time, we should pair it with offensive fights for Medicare for all, for free healthcare for all, and victories like that.
So just kind of drilling down into California specifically, I know you're in Washington and you've touched on some of this, but I want to just specifically get your take on this. And this is what makes me crazy, right? Is that here in California, we should have everything we need to create the highest standard of living for our citizens. We have the fourth largest economy in the world, right? We're essentially the fourth biggest country. And we electorally have done everything that we're told we're supposed to do. We've got super majorities of Democrats in both houses and the governorship. And yet we rank 34th in the nation in per pupil funding. We used to be first, but 50 years ago, a ballot measure came through, gutted that, and we have not been able to fix it. We've been mired at 34th in the nation. The Education Law Center gave school funding in California an F. Despite being able to afford it, we have had multiple attempts to try to get single payer healthcare passed. It's all been defeated. We have homeless crisis, wages are stagnant, housing costs are through the roof. Uh, why is this happening here? We, again, should have everything that we need to have this amazing state. What do you say is the reason that we have failed to get any of these things? And what do you think the CTA, the largest labor union in the country, can or should do to address these problems and fix things and move us forward?
I would say specifically within the union movement, the number one, two, and three, and up to 10 obstacles in the labor movement today is the prevailing ideas of business unionism. What does that mean? It means the ideas that are now prevailing in most of, or virtually all of the labor leadership, which is to when it comes to the rights and needs of their membership, most of the labor leadership prefers to have some sort of peaceful resolution for that with the bosses, and in the case of public school unions or public sector unions, it's with the administration, with the state, with the capitalist state in the city or county or state or federally, making peace with the bosses in some shape or form. And then the other side of business unionism is being tied at the hip to the parties of the bosses, which is the Democratic Party, and as I said, even now even making overtures towards Donald Trump, which is completely a dead end. And so business unionism means all of that, and business unionism means making a deal with the devil, and when you make a deal with the devil, you lose out. That is the only outcome for the working class, and that is why what we need is a reversal of the the prevalence of business unionism, which is, I would call, the idea of class struggle unionism, meaning having a leadership and a union that is fully understanding that you don't make pacts with the bosses, because the interests of the bosses are diametrically opposed to the needs of the working class. And so, for the union itself and for the working class as a whole to win anything meaningful, it will need a fight back. And so, in every contract battle, looking at strike action as a necessary component of the fight back, because withholding your labor is the most powerful tool that working people have against the forces of capitalism. So I think the only way to push forward to break from this logjam is step number one, for the union movement, for the labor movement to understand the Democratic Party is not our friend. The Democratic Party, like the Republican Party, is an enemy of the working class. And we need, in order to win anything meaningful, we need to first break from the Democratic Party, break from the bosses and their parties, and fight independently for the working class. And that means holding the Democrats publicly accountable on all of this.
Let's move on to healthcare. We talked about this a bit, and I think we discussed it a little bit. Um, Regarding healthcare in this country, is there anything else that you really want to say about? I mean, no one's going to deny it's a crisis. I mean, it's how many more videos do we need to see of people talking about their lives being devastated, of doctors recording their phone calls, trying to get critical treatment? What do you
From the phone calls with the insurance companies.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
What do you think is the best path forward on this fight? And what role do you think state and national labor unions, CTA and NEA specifically, if you want, should be doing to assist in this fight?
Yeah, I think this is a very crucial question, Mark. I'm so glad we're talking about this in a little more detail. I mean, obviously, the health insurance companies are some of the most evil here in terms of denying healthcare to millions upon millions of Americans. This is, keep in mind, this is the richest country in the world, and people are not only dying needlessly, they are facing sickness and ill health needlessly while they are alive. And then on top of that, something we haven't even mentioned is the enormous amounts of medical debt. that working class families are facing, and that's on top of the student debt, the credit card debt. People are just not able to make ends meet. All of this is at the doorstep of the health insurance industry, the big pharma industry, the hospital industry, and of course the Democratic and Republican parties, because they are both bankrolled by these parties and they are both doing the bidding of these parties. But let's look at this in more concrete terms. And California is a very crucial example for this. I mean, California has 1 in 8 US residents living in your state. It's the most populous state, as you all know, with 39 million or so residents. This means that roughly 12% of the entire US population resides in California. The reason I'm saying this is that if California was to win free healthcare for all, or CalCare, as one of the initiatives that was put forward by the nurses union was called, then that would mean that 1 in 8 residents of the US would get public health care. And that would have provided a huge jolt of momentum for universal health care nationally, because it would have been a huge inspiration for workers, and it would put massive pressure on the political establishment nationally to act. CalCare has been tried twice, in 2022 and 2024, and both times it has failed. And what happened was, both times it was the main culprit, the killer of those bills, was the Democratic Party. But it's important to understand how they do it. The way they do it, they meaning the Democrats, is different than the Republicans. Now, Republicans openly oppose any kind of healthcare for publicly funded anything. It's not just healthcare; they are against public education, public housing, all of that. The Democrats don't say, at least many of the Democrats don't say, the so called progressive Democrats, and I'm using air quotes deliberately because what they end up doing is not actually progressive. The progressive Democrats say they support some of these things, they even bring forward bills, but they do it in such a way that makes you feel like something's happening, but in reality they have no intention of anything winning. So you have had bill after bill being put forward, not just in California, but also in other states like Michigan, and also federally, federal bills being put forward by so-called progressive Democrats. And that has happened for 2.5 decades, and not a single one of those has won. I mean, the sponsor of that legislation in California in 2022, Ash Kalra, who is a Democratic Assembly member, he himself dealt the death blow to that bill by scuttling his own bill at the last minute and refusing to even put it up for a vote, with the excuse that it didn't have enough votes to pass. Do you know how many votes I had when I launched the battle for $15 an hour? One, my vote. And then we ended up forcing the entire city council to vote yes on it. And so here the difference is in how we, what kind of strategy we use. And also the starting point of that strategy is understanding that Democrats are not our friends. The Democratic Party has zero intention of ever allowing Medicare for all to win. What they do want you to do is to be caught up in the endless merry-go-round of these two parties, as Chomsky says, to be caught up in this false debate. Because you think that Democrats are better than Republicans. And yes, there are actual differences between them. But the point is to limit the debate to just Democrats versus Republicans, where both parties are dead set against working class people winning anything, because both parties represent the health insurance industry, big pharma, and the hospital industry. So we need to look at a counter example, an example that has actually won. And I want to offer two examples. One is to look at how Canada won its own public health care. The way that Canada won was not by endlessly asking the liberals, versus the Tories, which are equivalent to Democrats and Republicans, to pass something, because that was a dead end. So it was socialists and militant trade union leaders in what was called the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation. They pushed forward and won public health care in the province of Saskatchewan. And that became so popular, and they had to fight because there was massive opposition against them, but they did win. And then when Saskatchewan won its public health care, it became so popular because it works, public health care works. And that is why it became so popular that people nationally in Canada wanted it. And that put so much pressure on the parties of the ruling class that it was the Tories, the conservatives, who ended up passing national health care, because they were afraid that if they didn't, it would come back to bite them in the election. So, in other words, it was actual fear for their own political careers that forced them to do it. But the factor that pushed them was winning it in a province.
That point that you bring up, that's definitely in the conversation here in California. Those of us fighting for single payer is that we're this giant domino, and in many ways, California is ground zero for this fight because if California can get it, of course, everyone will see that it's awesome, and then everyone else will be asking, why don't we have healthcare? And so, definitely feeling that. Um, let's move on to vouchers and charter schools. Again, kind of staying with education specific. This is a big area of debate within our union. We have a significant number of people of union members that teach in charter schools, and so it makes the conversation complicated. What is your assessment of the voucher charter school movement, and what would you say is the path forward to reconcile this conflict between public schools and charters? And what do you think the CTA and CTA leadership should be doing here to kind of make our way through and find a solution?
Yeah, as you said, a lot of the teachers now are increasingly members of charter schools. They teach in charter schools, and I think the there are two crucial components. One is understanding what the genesis of charter schools was. I mean, we know that charter schools were put forward as the key means for privatizing public education and as a way of combating the power of the educator unions, teachers unions. That is what it really, that's its genesis. The genesis of charter schools was as a weapon against public sector unions. And the charter schools also became the sort of the be all end all solution because of the crisis in public education. And the crisis in public education is really coming from the fact that public education is deeply underfunded, just like basically everything else is underfunded in American society right now. I mean, university education is underfunded, healthcare is basically not funded at all, transportation is underfunded, our regular infrastructure of roads and bridges and everything that people need is underfunded, housing, public housing is underfunded. So public schools are a casualty of the attack on the working class as a whole. And so I think the best way forward is to attempt to unite working class people around the idea of full funding for public education and full union rights in all schools and push back against privatization. I think that is a unifying fight that can win over working people as a whole. And also, just to look at what the statistics are in charter schools. If you look at charter schools, the statistics are extremely crucial because there are there are outlier examples of how some charter schools function well, but ultimately you will see when you look at it, in more detail, you'll see that actually the preponderance of evidence shows that public schools work dramatically better if they are fully funded. So, in other words, it's a dishonest way of comparing charter schools and public schools that it goes on, where you compare one isolated charter school which may have some decent funding compared to a vast number of public schools that are deeply underfunded. And that's like comparing apples and oranges and saying, look, this is a better apple or this is a better orange. In other words, we have to insist on, insist on educators and the community looking at it scientifically. And I think there is huge support for public sector unions. There is especially huge support for public teacher unions. And I think the best way forward is to do that, is to focus on full funding for public education by taxing the rich. That's a unifying battle. It doesn't matter whether you're charter schools or public schools. Full funding for public education is going to benefit everyone. Full union rights is also going to benefit everyone. And then on top of that, I think uniting all the workforce, regardless of where they work, around larger goals like ending the genocide, ending the starvation, stopping the deportations, they're also very hugely unifying factors. And so that's the kind of battle that I believe the public sector unions need to fulfill.
So philosophically, as a organizer yourself, and this is, I think, one of the issues that slows down this fight is, so I'm a, let's say I'm a union leader, I'm on the board, I'm a whatever, right? And I see there's a fight, and in this particular case, it's charter schools, right? But I've got a significant, it's not a majority, but a significant number of members oppose this particular stance. Philosophically, right? When it comes to issues where you can see this is going to cause a split, no matter how we slice it, what do you have sort of a rule of thumb or a lens to view when, like, the Gaza thing, it might seem like there's a preponderance of assent in a certain direction, but it's very divisive in a lot of ways. Charter schools are very divisive. What do union leaders do when we're faced with some really controversial things to get the movement forward? Do you find some sort of middle ground and water down a solution so you keep everybody in the union, or do you say, no, I'm going to take this philosophical stance and be very clear, and then people leave? Do you see the question? Like, what's your assessment of that, or your how do you work through that?
Yeah, I would actually start with a completely different framework. I would say that full funding for public education by taxing the rich is not a divided opinion. If you look at opinion polls, there I mean, yes, are there some people who oppose it? Of course. I mean, no statistical poll is 100%. That's the point. If you so the starting point is to understand that most of the overarching questions in society do have majority support. That's good enough for me. I don't expect everyone to agree. I mean, look, Mark, you and I have both been in the union movement. Every time a strike vote is taken, you will get some members who vote against a strike. So what? That's life. I mean, that's democracy. There will be some people who disagree with you. But if the majority is agreeing with you, which is the case for all of these issues that we have talked about, then it is the responsibility of the union leadership to carry out that fight. So I would have a different framework altogether, and actually my starting point would not to be calling these things philosophical questions, or in other words, moral purity questions. And the second way in which I would have a different framework altogether is that I have complete faith, and this is not just a blind faith, this is based on historical evidence. I have complete faith that the majority of the working class can and will be won over on the correct positions. I mean, look, when the Vietnam War first began, the majority of the Americans were in support of it. They weren't against it. But by the time it ended because the majority were dead against it. Because it was a hated war. People were exhausted from seeing the body bags. So there were mass strike actions, protest movements on the streets, in the United States in the early 70s. And on top of that, you had active duty soldiers refusing to follow the orders of their commanders because they wanted the war to end. And it was under Richard Nixon, another warmonger, a Republican reactionary, that the war was ended. So if you look at the arc of history, when there is a real leadership to fight back, the arc of history shows that the mass of the working class can and does get won over to the correct and what most people would consider moral positions in history. And so in this case, in the case of the teachers unions and also in the union movement in as a whole, I would say the thing that is putting the brakes on progress inside the labor movement and for the labor movement to win victories is not the divided opinion among the rank and file. I absolutely refuse to accept that based on historical evidence and current evidence. The real brakes that are being put forward are by the leadership. The leadership of most of these unions, like Randy Weingarten, they are the ones who are guilty for holding the labor movement back because of their own ties to the Democratic Party, their own refusal to break from business unionism in the 1930s. Those general strikes won phenomenal historic victories. They completely changed the course of US history, and they were led by socialists, and Marxists, and that is why they were able to win despite some of the union leadership being against them. And all of those general strikes actually put the fear in the capitalist class that there might actually be revolutions against capitalism at that time. And so the New Deal was a concession that was wrenched from the hands of the capitalist class by these powerful general strike actions. That's a lesson that we should take with us. And in fact, I think we need a revival of that kind of militancy inside the labor movement. That is the only solution.
So continue on this idea of, you really have to work outside of the major political parties. That, this is not the people that are fighting for the working class. You're an independent, right? And you're going into Congress. Um, I'd like to get your take on something specific on how an independent can make some change in Congress. So one of the big things that we are struggling with and fighting for is IDEA. That's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. It was passed 50 years ago, right? And it's what requires all the special education services that schools have to provide, but it's unfunded mandate, right? When it was passed, Congress said they could pay up to 40% of the costs. But since its passage, they've never paid more than 17%. I think one year they did 20%, but that's it. Usually it hovers around 10, 12%, which I think is where it's at right now. Let's say you win and you get into Congress, okay? You're an independent though. What what is going to be your strategy for something specific, say like IDA funding? How could you, not being, because you're not going to get the choice committee assignments, right? They'll be out to get you. How could an independent get movement on IDA or get it to the floor for a vote? What, and this could, you could replicate this for any of the, strategies you're going to push for. What is somebody who's, you know, uh, living the notion of, I'm going to work outside these parties? What's your strategy? Let's say you win and you're a new member of Congress, and use IDA as maybe an example.
Sure. I think that is an important measure that should be one actually, and for the neediest of students and of parts of our society. And so I strongly support it. I think the starting point to understand what we could do with even one position of an independent socialist in the US Congress is to see what we did in City Hall in Seattle here. When I was elected, everybody told, first of all, actually, before I even took office, when we launched our campaign for city council, we had, and this was 2013, it was a while ago, and at that time the idea of calling yourself socialist openly was not at all common. In fact, I was the first elected representative at that time after 100 years who was openly calling myself as a socialist. And a lot of these Democratic Party operatives told me, you're never going to get elected if you call yourself socialist, and oh, you need to take corporate money. If you want to get elected, you need to register as a Democrat and pay your respects, kiss the ring of all the powerful Democrats in order to win. And I did none of that. I did the exact opposite of what the Democratic Party operatives were trying to tell me. And it was on the basis of running as an independent socialist, as a campaign that was fighting for $15 an hour, that we were able to win. I mean, we turned our election campaign into a vehicle to build momentum for the $15 an hour minimum wage, and also the Amazon tax and renters' rights, which we also won in the subsequent years. But $15 an hour, we won within 6 months of me taking office. And so, like I said before, earlier in this interview, when I first took office, there was one vote for $15 an hour, and that was me. And everybody in the typical sort of lobbying environment, all of them said, oh, you're never going to win 15. In fact, uh, a few weeks after I took office, two of the most powerful Democrats in City Hall came into my office, sat me down, and said, it's all well and good that you have roused the rabble, but we're here to tell you that City Hall runs on our terms, and you're not going to win any minimum wage increase, let alone 15. And less than 6 months later, we had forced them, those two and others, to vote yes on $15 an hour. And like I said, one of the pitch battles during that $15 war was on inflation increases. And the Democrats, I mean, they fought tooth and nail. It was shameful. It was shameful. They fought tooth and nail to prevent inflation increases from being included. But our 15 now movement defeated them. And that is why our minimum wage is now the highest in the nation at $20.76. And that offers a glimpse into how you can win. And actually, the only way to win is by being an independent. And by understanding that the way you win is not to play this electoral calculus game like, oh, how many votes do I have? Let me go behind the scenes. I'm telling you, Mark, if you go behind the scenes, they will kill everything you are fighting for. That is how they do it. And they will use a carrot and a stick. They will use a carrot to try and flatter you, to try to isolate you from the movement. They will kill every effort that you are putting forward on behalf of the working class if you try to gain some negotiating ability with them behind the scenes. No. See, that's a fatal mistake that a lot of even well-meaning people make. If your quest is to further your own career, with all the good intentions in the world, if your main quest is to further your career, to ensure that your day-to-day life is peaceful with the Democrats, with the chamber lobbyists, and with everyone else in that whole cabal, then you are going to sell out working class people, because fighting for the working class looks no other way. It looks the way it looked for me, which is the Democratic Party politicians were absolutely hideous towards me. They used every kind of character assassination, psychological manipulation, social ostracizing. They used all of these things as a weapon against me every time I was in City Hall. The only way you can survive that and also overcome that and defeat them and force them to adopt your agenda is if you understand that all those weapons are not against you but against the working class that you represent, and that your job is to withstand all of that and not put your daily comfort ahead of the working class. And the way you beat them back is by building the working class fight back. And so I was, despite all the horrendous treatment that I received from the Democratic Party, it didn't touch me because I was never alone. I was never isolated. I had the working class with me. And we brought that movement to City Hall. We put the fear of the working class in the hearts of the Democrats and the big business people, and then we were able to win. A very important quote is from a corporate landlord lobbyist who, when he retired, he said that all the money, every dollar that the corporate real estate lobby spent on their Democrats and cultivating their relationship with Democrats was wasted while I was in City Hall. I mean, we won a massive, unprecedented renters' bill of rights, rights that are unheard of in most other places. And we won that by defeating the landlord lobby. And he said that every dollar they spent on their Democrats was wasted, because when the Democrats would come into the city council chambers and they faced what he called, it's a quote, Sawant's army, they were forced to vote yes with us. That's how you win. You bring the freaking army into City Hall. And that is what we're going to do. We're going to bring the freaking working class army into the halls of Congress, into Washington, D.C., because that is the only way to win.
So it sounds like, just to rephrase, like what you're saying to leaders in the labor union is that what you do is you plant your flag in the sand and you mobilize
Mobilize.
members to shame and strike fear
Yes.
into that. Politics is a game of fear. It's who do they fear the most? And
Yes.
right now they fear their donors. And if I don't do what the donors say, I'm out. Labor's going to go along with whatever I do, but we need to change that calculus where they say, wow, I'm really afraid of my donors, but the holy crap, the labor unions will really come after me if I don't do this. Would that be a fair assessment?
It would be an accurate assessment. The only thing I would say differently is that my message is not to the leadership of the NEA and AFT. My message is to the rank and file of the NEA and AFT and to the badass members. And I would say we should cancel the word lobbying from our political vocabulary. Lobbying the Democrats gets us nothing. They take us for granted. The union movement has donated millions upon millions of dollars into trying and electing Democrats. And what have we got in return? We have got worsening living standards. We have got unprecedented attacks on unions. We have got broken promises. We had even AOC and Pramila Jayapal and Ro Khanna voting to break the railroad workers strike. Let's replace the word lobbying by the word fight back. That's what we need. Not lobbying, but fight back. And understanding that these Democrats are not on our side. And you know what? The progressive Democrats, their existence is not to deliver progress to the working class. Their existence is to act as a fig leaf for the anti-working class, anti-union Democratic Party. So the AOCs, the Pramila Jayapals, the Ro Khannas, they all give cover to the Democratic establishment. They all voted to break the railroad worker strike 3 years ago. They have voted for Israel military funding. They are all betrayers of the working class, and that is why the only way we can win idea or any other progress for public education is for us, whether we get elected or not. This is the strategy that's needed nationally for the labor movement: is to go on strike, go hold mass movements, mass rallies, mass civil disobedience to fight for our rights.
So would love to get your assessment of third parties. You're running as an independent. Whenever I hear people talk about we can't go with the mainstream parties, we got to run independent, my first thought is why not the Greens? They've got infrastructure in every state. They can win elections. Jill Stein could have won if people had voted for her. And I think this would be kind of my critique of the left a little bit was we had Jill Stein running, we had Claudia de la Cruz, and we had Cornel West, all pretty much having the same platform. Why split the vote like that? So specifically to the Green Party, do you have any particular critique of them? And then I always think like, has anybody talked about some sort of progressive alliance amongst all of these third parties that all have similar thoughts where we caucus together, do a primary together, everyone keeps their identity, right, but comes together, puts their candidates up, we debate, and then we all collectively vote, and whoever wins, that's who we all get behind as an alliance. So again, Green Party thoughts, and then how do we bring together this sort of fractured third party movement that seems to be all saying the same thing?
First of all, I'm really glad you brought this up, because the question of a new party for the working class is the logical question that comes up when we say we need the union movement, we need the working class to break from the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, which means obviously we need our own party, without which we cannot move forward. And we need a party that is rooted in social movements. We need a party of the kind that will do the kind of work that we have done in Seattle, and what we're doing with Workers Strike Back and our campaign for the U.S. Congress, right? I mean, we're not we're not running election campaigns for the sake of electoral careers of any individuals. Every election campaign is in service of the working class. We run them, as the Seattle Times described my 2013 campaign. They described my 2013 campaign as a referendum on $15 an hour, because that's how we ran our campaign. It wasn't about my career, it was about winning this city council position so that we can win $15 an hour, the Amazon tax, and renters' rights. And we delivered on all of those fronts. And so we need a new party for the working class that is rooted in social movements. And that is why I also reject the very misleading sort of false dichotomy between elections or movements. I mean, that's a wrong way of framing it. We need mass movements, absolutely. And that is going to be the backbone of any social change. And that party has to also have, I mean, that those movements also have to have our own party, because at the end of the day, if we don't have that, then people end up thinking they have to vote for Democrats and Republicans. And not only that, more important than that, without a new party for the working class, there is no real way to pose an actual threat to the Democrats and Republicans. So when people say, oh, well, we don't want to be a spoiler. No, you do want to be a spoiler. The working class, the duty of the working class, my duty as a socialist is to spoil the Democratic and Republican parties, because they are both degenerate, rotten parties of the ruling class, of the billionaires. We have nothing in common with them. We do need to destroy those two parties. And the only way of doing that is to build mass movements, and really, in my view, revolutionary movements. And we need our own political party as well. And it's not a question that is only being discussed in the United States. We are just seeing in the UK, Zara Sultana and Jeremy Corbyn, formerly of the Labour Party, have launched a new party. And within 3 days, 500,000 British working class people have signed up to join. You
Yeah,
know,
I just saw an article saying they're in 3 days the largest political party
yeah, it's
in three
insane. Yeah,
days. Like that's
it,
crazy.
it is absolutely, but it shows the hunger for fight back. They working class people in the United States are also hungry. That shows you why the Democratic Party's approval rating has cratered. I mean, I don't know if you saw the Wall Street Journal poll that came just 2 days ago, which shows that the Republicans have also dipped majorly in polling. I mean, they are very unpopular. The Republicans are deeply unpopular. However, the Democrats are more unpopular than Republicans. The
Yeah,
Democrats
with
have.
Trump in the White House, everything right now, they're
Yes, with
just
Trump at the
popular.
White House. Yes, with Trump's disastrous tariffs, with his brutal attacks on Medicaid and Medicare, the trillion
Catching
dollars of
people off the
cuts.
street.
Yeah,
They're still less
exactly.
popular than that.
Exactly. So that tells you what the Democratic Party is. They don't stand for us. They would rather be sent into the toilet of approval ratings than do any damn thing for the working class. That's who they are, and that is why we need an alternative. And I totally agree with you that last year it was a really sad situation that we did not have unified left support for Jill Stein's campaign. Worker Strike Back and I, we strongly supported Jill's campaign. We took a vote inside our organization to make the Jill Stein campaign the main priority because we correctly said that that was the main avenue of struggle for the working class against the Democrats and the Republicans in a presidential election year. And it was really sad that Cornel West and Claudia de la Cruz, all of these candidates ran against Jill Stein instead of unifying the left vote. We really think that that should have happened and that should happen in the future. I really appreciate Jill Stein herself, Jason Call, her campaign manager. I mean, they have done some really phenomenal work. They have made huge sacrifices. I also appreciate the Green Party for the decades of work they have done on ballot access, and that needs to be put to use. Because that is something that has been hard won and that belongs to the working class. So it's not our call for a new party is not in any way antagonistic to the Green Party. What we're saying is that we need a new mass party, and the Green Party, other organizations on the left, Workers Strike Back, we all need to be inside that party. And I really agree with you, Mark, that what we need is a new mass party where individual organizations can keep their identity. We can keep discussing through our differences. We need honest and friendly debates on the things we disagree on, but we also need an umbrella platform, a new mass party that will unite us on the big issues and where we can run unified campaigns and candidates for office. But we have to have that new mass party has to have certain conditions. This is not a party where people can come and make their careers. All elected leaders have to pledge to take an average worker's wage. So we need all of that. We need the demands. Demands need to be anti-war, pro-worker, and they need to be concrete. So we have a vision of that kind of new mass party. And in fact, just last thing I'll mention is that in February, we had Worker Strike Back and I organized a Fight the Rich conference where Jill Stein herself and Chris Hedges, they all came and spoke alongside me, and we all agreed that we need a new mass party that will unite all these organizations.
So there is conversations like this happening.
Very much so, yeah.
That's awesome. So just to kind of wrap up and come back to your own organizing and political work, we've mentioned Workers Strike Back, Socialist Alternative. I think we mentioned Revolutionary Workers, some of the organizations you've been involved in. Uh, is there any final things you'd like to say about these groups? Any updates? Or things that are upcoming events, upcoming strategies, things that the union members would find very beneficial and useful, things to consider as far as getting involved in any of these organizations.
Yes, I mean, as I make no secret, I am a revolutionary socialist, and so my organization is Revolutionary Workers. I used to be a member of Socialist Alternative. Several of us who are in Revolutionary Workers used to be members of Socialist Alternative, but we have since left because we felt that the leadership of Socialist Alternative was not interested in building class struggle. We believe that Marxism means actually engaging in the working class and winning concrete victories and putting forward a fighting strategy. And that is why coming out of my decade on the city council, I also founded Workers Strike Back. Workers Strike Back is a broad national organization that comprises working people from states across the nation. And so I would urge badass teachers to join Workers Strike Back. We have a lot of union members in our union. And in fact, Workers Strike Back members have helped lead Fight Back in their own union. Just to give a concrete example, the members of Workers Strike Back, who are also members of public sector unions in Washington state, they recently carried out a real fighting strategy inside their own union and then won resolutions despite the opposition of the leadership of the unions. They were able to win resolutions for mass rallies at the state capitol, and where the main chant at the rallies was no cuts, no furloughs, strike, strike, strike. That was very important. And just to keep in mind, the state legislature in Washington state is dominated by Democrats. The governor is a Democrat, and these Democrats together have carried out brutal budget cuts in our state. And through this fighting strategy led by Worker Strike Back members, we were able to we were able to win some victories. We weren't able to stop all the cuts. However, it was strong enough to force the governor to walk back his demand that public sector workers take on mandatory furloughs. So we won a real victory by pushing for a strike action. That's the kind of politics we bring through Worker Strike Back. So I really hope a lot of people who are watching this will join Workers Strike Back. You can go to Workers Strike Back, all one word, .org to join, and become member. And most of all, I think what we need is for people to join our campaign, our congressional campaign. As you said, I'm running for the U.S. Congress. I am running to end the genocide, to end all U.S. military funding for the Israeli state, to end the brutal occupation of Palestinian lands, to stop the deportations, to shut down the detention centers, to demand that ICE is shut down. And we are also calling for free healthcare for all, funded by taxing the rich, and for national rent control. We are running against a warmongering, genocidal corporate Democrat named Adam Smith, who has been in the Congress, US Congress, for nearly 30 years. He has voted to fund the genocide. He has voted for military dollars for Israel for nearly 30 years. He, in fact, voted to carry out the Iraq War. He voted in 2002 for the George W. Bush Iraq War. He has the blood of 500,000 Palestinians and 1 million Iraqis on his hands. He's also one of the people who pushed for the bailouts of big banks in 2008, 2009, when working people were struggling with the Great Recession, and he also voted to create ICE. So we believe that it's high time Adam Smith was thrown out of office. But we also know that he's bankrolled by the weapons industry, by the tech billionaires, by the healthcare industry, by the Zionist lobby. And so, in order to overcome all the vicious opposition that we are going to face, we need working people nationally to get involved. And I want to be clear, this campaign is happening in Washington state, but this is a campaign for all working people. Nationally, people need to get involved. We have ways in which people can get active with our campaign, and that is the only basis on which we can win. And we have shown that we can win through our politics. As I said, I was on the city council for a decade. I won 4 elections. I was never defeated in those elections, but the only way we won was building a massive working class led fight back with thousands of people on the ground volunteering to canvass for the campaigns.
Well, we'll put links to the Workers Strike Back and your campaign in the show notes so people can get that information. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. And we certainly wish you all the best on your campaign for Congress and on all of your future endeavors. You are a real warrior for the working class.
Thank you so much, and solidarity to you all.
We hope you enjoyed our interview with socialist, activist, and political leader Kshama Sawant. As mentioned, we have links to her organization, Workers Strike Back, and her campaign in the show notes. Certainly, Kshama has a lot to say about the direction this country is headed and what she believes our state and national unions can and should do to address it. She also has certainly some hard critiques of unions and of us as union leaders. But agree or disagree, it would be a mistake to discount her. Until we have achieved world-class funding for schools and world-class pay for educators, we must be relentlessly critical of ourselves, of our strategy, and our tactics. And we must especially listen to our toughest critics, particularly those that have shown a lifelong commitment to the working class and unions, as well as a history of successfully organizing, as Kshama most certainly has. What do you think? What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Send us your comments, thoughts, suggestions, and we'll read those on our next podcast. In the meantime, we hope you will consider joining the BATS team. We have a number of committees that meet monthly over Zoom: Educators for Single Payer, fighting to bring publicly funded healthcare to our state; the IDEA Alliance, fighting to fully fund special education; our Disability Justice team, fighting to ensure everyone has equal access to society; and our two newest committees, the Artificial Intelligence team, working to take on one of the most important forces impacting education; and finally, our long-term funding think tank, brainstorming ways to finally achieve world-class funding for our schools. The Badass Teachers Caucus believes there is a path to transform our society into an amazing future beyond our wildest dreams. And it will be because of union members like you, activists who refuse to accept anything less than a world of abundance for all, that we will create the way forward. On behalf of the Badass Teachers Caucus, I'm Mark Norbert. Thank you for listening, and stay union strong.